Rishi Sunak's bonfire of net zero policies contained some interesting measures that many people had never heard of. These were the so-called proposals that the Prime Minister said he is scrapping. Sunak posted this after his Downing Street speech on Wednesday. We're stopping heavy-handed measures. Taxes on eating meat. New taxes to discourage flying. Sorting your rubbish into 7 different bins. Compulsory car sharing. Expensive insulation upgrades. One problem, none of these are actual government policies. Former Environment Secretary George Eustice was asked about the oppressive measures we've all been spared while he was on Channel 4 News.
Rishi Sunak claimed he'd cancelled a load of policies that I must have just been asleep for. I mean, when did they announce that we were all going to have 7 bins and that they were going to tax meat?
Well, there have been proposals from a number of reports. So there was a Henry Dimbleby report that said
No, when did the government say it was going to do it?
The government hasn't, but the Climate Change Committee has. And so the government, and including in my time, was endlessly assailed by the Climate Change Committee to do things, some of which actually
The Climate Change Committee is independent of government. Rishi Sunak claims that he cancelled government plans. Is he just making stuff up?
Well,
when was it ever a government plan?
Look, I think I can forgive all politicians a bit of rhetoric. There weren't government plans for me.
So it was nonsense then, it was just rhetoric?
No, it is not nonsense. But
rhetoric is not true on that.
And on Good Morning Britain, Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch, who was out on the media rounds, was also asked about Sunak's brave fight against this non-existent policy.
Why did he come out and say that he's now going to scrap a meat tax, that nobody should have to have 7 bins? Was there ever a government policy to impose a meat tax? What was he actually scrapping there?
These were proposals that had come out from the Committee on Climate Change. So we have a committee called the CCC, which informs almost all of the policy that comes into reality.
But it was one of many policies that didn't go ahead. So these were policies that were these were proposals that were due to come in order for us to meet future carbon budgets. So you were going to impose a meat tax as government policy?
Well, we're not going to do that, but this was advice which we were given. On the previous show that I was on, people were criticising us for not following the Climate Change Committee's advice. The 7 bins was in the Environment Act 2021. So there are lots of bits of policy which we're looking at again, and we just don't think that the public will be able to wear these
7 bins? I thought it was 7 streams of recycling.
7 streams of bins, 7 streams, 7 bins.
Well, that is
something that is... either way, we're scrapping it, and it was in the Environment Act 2021. Okay.
7 streams, 7 bins, potato. Badenoch also at the end, you might have picked up on this, says it's in the Environment Act. It isn't. That is something that Rishi Sunak eventually was forced to make clear in this painful exchange on the Today programme.
Where was this proposal for the government to put a tax on meat that you had to scrap with such a fanfare?
Yeah, there were a range of things that have been proposed by lots of different people in order for us to meet.
Where was the proposal for a tax on meat?
You mentioned the Committee for Climate Change earlier. I mean, actually, if you look in their reports, they talked very specifically about saying it's particularly important that we see an accelerated shift, in their words, in our diets away from meat and dairy.
But I've just spoken to them, I've just interviewed them, and they said there is no mention of a tax on meat in any of their reports.
If you look at their report, it talks about an accelerated shift away from dairy and meat.
That's not a tax on meat.
It said that diets will need to shift away. It also says we'd have to implement measures to bring that about.
So they didn't propose a tax on meat. Where was the proposal for a compulsory car sharing that you say you scrapped?
Again, if you look in their report, it will talk very clearly about what they could describe as ride-sharing solutions, otherwise known as exactly what I was saying.
It's different from compulsory car sharing proposal.
What it then says euphemistically is one would need to consider demand-side measures to bring that about, which are otherwise known as compulsion or taxes. But elsewhere, actually, they're very open that taxes should be used to send a signal on things like reducing travel demand or the amount that people
was the government considering forcing people to have 7 bins? Another proposal you said you've scrapped?
Yeah, so if you look in the Environment Act and the associated consultations that were in place around 2021 from memory, there's a very clear statement in there about moving to consistent collection for recycling, the clear implication of which is 7 bins, and you can go through, and again, that's what people have raised concerns with, and that's what the policy work was looking
But
at.
hold on just a second. No, hold on a second, Prime Minister. You stand up with the authority of Prime Minister in this building and you say you're scrapping a series of proposals. And when I ask you about them, you say, oh, somebody considered and it was in the appendix of this document. There's nothing to be scrapped.
James, it seems pretty clear that Rishi Sunak's Tories are circling the plug hole. But what I want to know is, will this net zero rollback be washed away with them, or will it stay in our proverbial political sink for a likely incoming Labour government?
I think this is exactly the biggest problem with this thing. Look, I mean, I don't think the Tories are going to win the next election. It's really hard to see that happening. But them backing away from past commitments eases the pressure on Labour to deliver when it's in office. It makes life easier for the next Labour government because they don't have to do as much anymore to be somewhat better than Conservatives. And that's basically what they've set up here. And they will take that. We know they'll take that because everything that this Labour leadership has been doing is lining up as far as possible that they can do as little as possible once they get into office. They do not want that pressure applied. So I think people like Green New Deal Rising, going out and making sure that they go and, heckle sometimes Keir Starmer and protest and all the rest of it, that's an important part of getting this future Labour government to actually take the action that's needed rather than what they can get away with, because the Tories are making life easier for them right now.